Okay, Edris is actually on StreamText. Our StreamText link is ready to go. Sierra sent out the link, and let's turn it over to our speakers. Sorry, guys. Kimberly, are you ready to take it away?
I am ready. All right, so thanks so much for everybody's patience. I know that sometimes making sure that we provide fully accessible webinars can sometimes be challenging, just with making sure our captioners and all of that are set up. So we appreciate your patience today. So we're really excited to have this conversation today about IL philosophy within our Centers for Independent Living, and wanted to, I guess, start off a little bit by what our organization has done to kind of set the tone for independent living philosophy throughout with our decision making. So a couple of years ago, when I became the executive director of our organization, we were a little bit weak, and the independent living philosophy was really not really being implemented correctly. So what we needed to do is we really needed to set the tone for our organization. And so what we ended up doing is creating non-negotiable principles that we will not compromise, that guides every bit of our decision making as an organization. So we use our principles for a number of things, but mainly when we're looking at having programs, writing grants, when we're asked to collaborate on things, we use these principles. So for accessibility purposes, I am going to read the slides, and I will give you a little bit narrative from there. So the first principle that we use is empowerment. As Centers for Independent Living, we don't reach goals for individuals. We teach the skills that allow them to do for themselves. Now, a lot of other organizations that are not Centers for Independent Living often do for people with disabilities, which really does not promote independence, which really makes them dependent on the agency. So that is where CILs completely stand out. Inclusion. We advocate for individuals with disabilities to be included in integrated environments in the classroom, employment, housing, leadership roles, and in discussions that impact their lives and the disability community. So we do not believe in anything segregated. There should not be particular facilities for people, so we do not like institutions, as we all know. And then also independence. Individuals with disabilities have the right to control their own lives and make decisions about what's best for them. We believe every individual can be independent. And sometimes that does take a little bit of creativity. If someone has never been given the opportunity to communicate, we will explore communication devices. We will make our programs in a way that can be fully accessible, and that people will be able to make choices. The next slide, if I can get somebody to change that. The next is equality. We advocate for equal rights and access, not special treatment. And then disability pride. Disability is not a negative word. It means we are more adaptable. We are proud of who we are, and the barriers we have overcome have only made us stronger. And can you all hear me? Mary, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, thank you. So these principles are what we use to really guide our organization. Everyone has been pretty much drilled these, and this is what it completely runs our Center for Independent Living is this model. Of course, we do a lot of onboarding, and we'll probably talk about that in a little bit. And then we also follow the basic IL principles, which, if I can get the slide to move, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulties myself over here. The independent living movement is founded in the belief that people with disabilities, regardless of the form, have a common history and a shared struggle, and that we are a community and a culture that will advance further when we're branded together politically. And so when we do our Advocacy Day events at the State House, we do make sure that we are all together. So it is across disability. all of our programs are also cross disability. We do not have particular programs for certain populations. Equal opportunities and rights are for all. There should be no segregation by disability or stereotypes, and that was what I was mentioning before. People with disabilities are the best experts on their own needs and should decide what is best for them. And that's that consumer control piece of all centers for independent living. No person should live in institutions on the basis of disability. And that is obviously our transition core service. Having a disability does not mean a person is sick and requires a certified medical professional for daily living. So we want to make sure that we're not practicing any based off of medical model. And especially, you know, this has been a hot topic lately as far as individuals with autism as well. We do not want to push ABA because ABA tries to quote unquote cure. So we want to make sure that individuals have their option of what services they're given. People learn and grow from discussing their needs, concerns, and issues with people who have had a similar experience. And that's the magic of Centers for Independent Living. We are not like any other organization because we are a movement and an organization by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. So we really have no competition in our own areas, and we all should be really standing out and not trying to duplicate services that other people are providing, because we are so different, and we're going to approach it from that consumer-directed perspective. I can go to the next one. Yeah. Systemic cross-disability advocacy efforts are needed to ensure that people with disabilities benefit from all of the society that has to offer. And that, of course, is going back to events that I know a lot of CILs participate in. It's like advocacy days at the State House, making sure, or even legislation, making sure that people with disabilities are united, because a particular bill for one population could really truly impact other populations of individuals with disabilities. And a great example of that is, you know, our state had legislation that only protected blind parents with disabilities. And so our organization actually went back and wrote legislation with non-federal funding, and was able to pass the Persons with Disabilities Right to Parent Act, which is a cross-disability piece of legislation. And so that so we needed to kind of go fix that and make sure that it was a cross-disability legislation that protects the rights of everybody with a disability. There should be no barriers to independence, including architectural, communication, and attitudinal barriers. So I think this is what Centers for Independent Living truly fight for every single day. And then we believe, as CILs, we believe the best organizations suited to support and assist individuals with disabilities are governed and operated by individuals with disabilities. I know something that really gets under my skin is a lot of organizations that are providing disability services, they don't even hire people with disabilities. And so I'm not sure what perspective they're approaching when that is offered. And then also leadership for independent living and disability rights is vested in individuals with disabilities. So we are not an organization that serve parents without disabilities. We are not typical service providers and we don't provide services to service providers or representatives. So we are vested in individuals with disabilities. So that's our perspective, and that's the consumers that we serve. And Mary, are you wanting to jump in and do this? Okay.
Hey, this is Sierra. So continuing with the technical difficulties.
Okay. Well, I think Larry and I can handle it.
You want to just keep going? That would be great.
Yeah. So one of the things that we really wanted to start the conversation off today is Larry and I kind of wanted to talk with you today about what were some of our experiences at the Centers for Independent Living that we've been at. And so one of the questions and discussions that we'll start with is, what did we learn about the history and philosophy when we started with our organizations, and what really stuck with us? And I'll go ahead and tell you what really stuck with me. And I love the independent living movement because it is our movement. We are not, again, like any other service providers in our area, and we are a movement that is run and operated by people with disabilities for people with disabilities. So that is one thing that really stuck with me as the executive director of ABLE South Carolina. Is this is our movement. And we own this. And so we've got to make sure that we do a great job with making sure the IL philosophy is implemented not only within our organization, but in the community. And Larry, did you want to speak about this as well?
Yeah, for sure. I'll jump in. There's a lot that sticks with me about learning about history and how we approach working with folks and consumer control and those kinds of things. But I think one of the things that really sticks with me is my experience first as an individual who came to a center as a consumer, looking for help with advocacy around public transportation. I had no idea what an independent living center was, and expected when I went in there with my complaint that they would fix it. And instead, there was this approach that said, we're going to teach you how to be that advocate, and you're in charge of, addressing the situation, and they help to facilitate that. And, so that needs to be our approach when folks come to us for support and assistance, no matter what it is, that we're taking the approach of giving them the skills they need to address whatever the situation might be in their life, and then supporting that person as they work to resolve it and move forward.
And I think, another thing with kind of how the philosophy kind of stuck with us too is, we're, no matter what disability we have, we're all in this together. And so we do share similar barriers with other individuals. I have a physical disability, and I always tell my staff and everybody that I'm out at the community, my barriers are really no different from someone with an intellectual disability, or someone who's blind, or someone who's deaf. And needs assessment after needs assessment always shows that employment, perception, housing, transportation are the common barriers within all of the disability community. And that's what I know SILs are all focusing on in their efforts. We also, the next question that we were going to touch upon as well is, how do we incorporate IL philosophy in our SILs on an ongoing basis? And so for ABLE South Carolina, we require ongoing professional development hours. And this is something that my board of directors takes very seriously as well. And this is outlined in our strategic plan. Every staff member is supposed to get at least 18 hours of professional development hours as it relates to their position. So we make sure that there are opportunities like ILRU, ILNet, NICL, April conferences, but we also make sure that whenever we implement our staff trainings, which are quarterly, we make sure that we're covering a topic that might be a hot topic. So the last staff meeting that we had, we really focused on the straw debate, plastic straws, and start really kind of immersing these topics within our organization so that everyone knows and speaks together as we advocate. We also make sure that we model for staff. I am the executive director, but sometimes you can catch me working with consumers. Sometimes you can catch me making sure that, I'm understanding what staff members are deal with every day within their own job responsibilities with reporting and data collection, but also just making sure that I am helping them along the ways too, to make them understand the independent living philosophy forever. So we really try to ingrain it. We have a number of supervisors within our departments, and we make sure that our supervisors have team meetings to discuss the independent living philosophy throughout, to making sure that if, staff are struggling with the philosophy, that we help provide examples. So that is something. And then also we make sure that our physical, cultural, and environment really matches the independent living philosophy. We make sure that, a rule that I have, and I have staff, we have 80% of our staff right now have disabilities. And I make sure that reasonable accommodations are offered to anybody with or without a disability within our organization. If something is available to help somebody do their job, we make sure that we provide it as well. So making sure that independent living philosophy is kind of throughout the organization so everybody sees the benefits. We also provide some intensive trainings. We have about a 2.5-week orientation process, and Mary is going to give you all a sample of our orientation process for our new employees. And then we also do, obviously, evaluations and provide more of that intensive trainings as new staff members come on board. And again, none of our programming goes against the philosophy. I know that there has been some centers for independent living in the country that may be providing services that assist people with getting guardianship. That is absolutely against the independent living philosophy. That strips somebody's rights away. So we make sure that any of our programs are within the independent living philosophy, and I think that is what hopefully all CILs are doing throughout the country. And I hope some will stop doing the guardianships and some of the other programs that are violating the rights of people with disabilities. And Larry, did you want to chime in with that?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna, in a minute here, I'm gonna talk about kind of some pieces of initial and ongoing training that I think are good ideas. So I'll kind of progress with that. I can jump into that, or if we want to give opportunities for comments, or how do we want to proceed?
I think if you want to, I'm not sure how the captioning is going quite yet. It's going great, but with Mary having technical difficulties,
Yeah. Okay.
if you want to jump in and do that section.
Sure.
And I'm here, and we're welcome to, if folks have thoughts, you're welcome to jump in at this point. Again, you do have that mute option for yourself. If you want to give it a go, you're welcome to jump in. But Larry, why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
Move
Sure.
forward and let folks know that they can, let them practice on meeting, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, sounds great. So Mary, if you're able to move the slides, I had some connectivity issues and I'm literally connected on my phone, and I'm not sure I can move those slides from my phone. So you're not the only one having technical trouble. So, but it wouldn't be a good training if we didn't. So thanks everybody for your patience, and I'm glad to be with you today. So I want to talk a little bit about passing on IL philosophy and what's important about our movement to staff, volunteers, and to your board. So I'm going to talk about both this initial onboarding and training that is hopefully a part of every center's orientation process to your job and what you do at the center, that it's really important to have that broader understanding of independent living philosophy and the history of our movement and significant events, etc. So we want to talk through some ideas for that initial and ongoing training, and this really moves us forward really well with the great stuff that Kimberly just talked about. So just first of all, it's really important to think about this from a broad perspective: staff, volunteers, and board members. The training that each of those folks from those different identities receive is probably going to vary a little bit, but it's really important that all three of these audiences get this opportunity to be engaged. So why is this important? Why is it important to do this initial and then ongoing? And I want to stress ongoing training around independent living. It can improve the quality and outcomes of services that your center provides. helps to keep everyone focused on mission and purpose, and that's really important. And really can help the organization stay focused on consumers, the individuals that you serve, and your connection to the broader community. I think that's really key, that we're expected to be a consumer-focused, consumer-driven organizations, and to be responsive to the needs of our communities. And those two pieces are super important to what we do as organizations. And so making sure that you're doing this training both when someone comes on board, and then as that person moves forward, whether they're at a year or 15 years, is important. So I just want to throw out some examples of how you can do this training, or even have just structured discussions around issues that are important to cover. So I've done some trainings with my staff just periodically around goal setting with consumers. They come in and you're going to open a CSR and maybe or maybe not do an IL plan, but you're setting goals for services. And it's really important that it's the individual who's driving that conversation, that you as a staff person are prompting them, but it's important that they're leading that. And so providing that training and those reminders for staff on an ongoing basis is really key. It's easy to slip into, this is another individual coming in the door and they said they want help with X, Y, and Z, and to kind of put yourself in a spot where maybe you're kind of controlling that process, and it's important not to do that. And again, similarly, how to write IL plans if you're doing that reflect the ambitions of the consumer. Also, just in general, trainings around approaches and techniques for ensuring consumer control at your center. So be it surveys that you do, and training staff on what they need to be looking for in that, or if it's listening sessions or whatever, just gathering that input and making sure that you're doing that, and that staff are in tune and aware with those things. And this is pretty key for me. I think it's really important to provide trainings and opportunities for learning that are driven by and really focused on the experience of folks from other backgrounds, be it ethnic or gender, racial, etc. That getting those perspectives and making sure that those conversations are led by folks from those communities, I think, is really important. And then training and observance and celebration of important events and dates in disability history can be a great training and learning opportunity for staff, board, and volunteers. And we'll talk more about that toward the end of my comments. So how do you do this, and where do you do this? So we often think about, okay, I've got a new employee coming on board, and we're going to do this training, as part of their orientation. But how do you do it on an ongoing basis? I found that staff meetings are an excellent opportunity to do this, to either as the director or ask your program director or other staff to lead conversations around different issues. So that can be a great place to do it. Informal office conversations over the water cooler, or over, during a potluck or whatever it is you're doing. Those informal conversations that you encourage to, even just to just go out of your way to ask a staff person or a group of staff people, hey, how's this going? What are some issues you're dealing with? What are some of your successes that you've had lately? Those can turn into really good training and learning opportunities. And so I often like it when you ask staff to share both successes and challenges in formal and at formal and in informal, easy for me to say, settings. I think that can be really great as well, and become great learning opportunities and sharing opportunities from one staff to another. It kind of incorporates a little that, that peer element and mentoring even, which is really important to us. I've often finally found it really ideal to create scenarios where I might present a situation or ask a staff person to develop a couple of fictitious situations in order to facilitate conversation, and to make sure that, so we might come up with a fictitious situation that a consumer is dealing with, and talk through how we might support that person in addressing whatever that issue is, and what our approach would be and how we would do it, and really with a focus on making sure that we are recognizing and valuing and putting first the goals and wishes of the individual. So those are just a few examples of how to, especially on an ongoing basis, I think a lot of centers tend to do fairly well with that onboarding piece, but I've been places where that ongoing, it's almost as if you come in the door, you get the orientation, you learn your job, you learn what you're supposed to do, and you're just expected then that, okay, you've got it and you're good. But I really feel like there's value in that ongoing, you know, training and learning and promoting those opportunities so that you stay focused. Real quick, I want to talk about so I talked about staff, but I also want to talk about volunteers and just making sure they are really valuable, and just making sure that you're including them and offering those opportunities to volunteers at your organization. It's really important. Often these are folks who are current or former consumers who your center has helped, and they may want to and supported, and they may choose to want to be part of what you're doing and want to give back. There may be community members who are invested in the work you do. You never know what you know what someone's interest is, but by volunteering and indicating that interest, they clearly have an interest in your work. And they fill important roles. Volunteers fill important roles in your organization. I mean, I've been to centers where volunteers are answering the phone, greeting people when they walk in. They may be doing consumer satisfaction surveys. They may be facilitating peer groups. You know, it goes on, and they fill important roles. So it's really necessary that they get this initial and ongoing support and training as well. And you never know, as was the case for me and many other folks I know, they may become future employees of the organization. So it's a real opportunity to be training people who may end up working for you. So again, engaging volunteers in this initial and ongoing training is really key. And when I talk again about that training, it's really the aisle history, philosophy, and just that ongoing piece. And then I want to talk about board members, because ultimately it starts at the top of your organization. If your board members get that training and initially and on an ongoing basis, they lead your organization, and it's really important that they are on board, obviously, with your philosophy and what you're about. Often we find, you know, we're looking for board members, and we're looking for characteristics and what we think might be valuable in a board member, but it's whether it's true across, you know, potential staff, volunteers, or board members. There aren't a lot of people who are just walking around with that working knowledge and understanding of the independent living philosophy. So you have to kind of teach that and make sure they buy into that. So it's really important. So ways to do that, obviously you can include IL philosophy, history, and other components in that initial training and onboarding that a board member gets. I think it's a good idea, where appropriate, to invite board members to participate in trainings and learning opportunities, formal type things that you might have at your organization, to be part of those conversations if it's appropriate. Invite consumers and staff. So invite consumers maybe to come in to a board meeting and talk about, to share their experience with the center, and have staff come to the board meeting and share what's going on with their program. But not just that, but also to talk about success stories and challenges that they've had. That can be real educational for board members. And then lastly, my experience is that often you submit written reports to board members and, you know, really other folks as well. And it's always great to include, again, success stories and challenges in those board reports, or written reports, I should say, that you're putting out there. It really helps to, again, educate and inform about independent living philosophy and what your organization is about. So if you're doing this, I kind of want to talk about, if you're doing this, how you will know you're doing it right. It's really key to look for this. It's a good indicator that you're doing it right. So examples and evidence of this: services provided at your center are determined and directed by consumers. That consumers are engaged, and you're not just doing for folks, that you're engaging them and that they're driving the process. Past and present consumers volunteering with the organization, it's a good indicator. Your center is a hub or place of activity for the disability community in your neighborhood, in your community. So volunteers, consumers, whatever. I have a colleague who talks about, she worked at one center and literally there were several consumers who had a coffee cup that they kept at the center, that it was a place they knew they could go and congregate and share. And so if your center looks like that, it's a good indicator that you're doing this right. The leadership of your organization reflects the diversity of your community. So, that's board, staff, et cetera, and management. And that it resembles the diversity of your community. So lastly, I just want to talk about passing it on to the community. Kind of, how do you pass on this IL philosophy and your values and what you're about? How do you embed that into the community? I thought of a couple of ways that you do that. You celebrate your history, our history, I should say. It could be the ADA. So I know some of us just had some ADA 29th anniversary events, and we're coming up on the 30th, and we'll celebrate those things in a variety of ways. I know some centers really do some things around celebrating Ed Roberts Day, and use that as an opportunity to educate the community about Ed Roberts and the broader independent living movement. And I've become real familiar with in several communities, centers, and other organizations come together, but especially driven by centers, to promote disability pride festivals. And I think that can be a great way of bringing the community together and projecting your values as an organization and what you're about into the community, so folks see that. Engaging with the community. So for example,
Hey, Larry.
Yep.
Can I jump in real quick just for the
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and just making sure, what's really important too is just making sure that all of your events are fully accessible for anyone with any type of disability. And so really making sure that there's plain English flyers, there's alternative formats, there's sign language interpreters, there's live captioning when needed, American Sign Language interpreter. So kind of thinking through every aspect of every disability that exists to make sure that all of your events are accessible when you hold them.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. And I want to add on to that one that I know gets increasing attention, and that's the whole being aware of chemical sensitivity. That becomes an issue for some folks as well. So just in general, that you make sure you have that conversation if you're going to be part of, or that you're planning an event solely as your organization, that you really look at that accessibility feature. That's really a great point. I think it's also important to engage with other civil rights organizations and civil rights activities in your community. I have found a lot of value in being part of activities, events, educational awareness, etc. events that, disability crosses all aspects of society. And so, if it's an event for, that's being driven by, I'll just say, for example, the Urban League or the LGBTQ community or whoever, that disability is part of that community. And it's really important to engage with those folks. It may not be a disability event per se, but to bring your point of view to their event and vice versa, to invite them to bring their values to your event, and that kind of thing can be really vital, because disability, again, crosses all aspects of society. So those are just some comments I wanted to share, and I'm definitely interested in hearing some questions or comments or ideas from the audience.
Awesome, and I am too. So at this point, why don't we, if folks can what you do is if you move your cursor on your screen, and you should see either the top or the bottom, a microphone. If you're on the screen, you can click that to unmute it. And we've been talking about a whole bunch of stuff today, everything from what are the IL philosophy principles we should have, how do we incorporate it in our organizations, in our training, and how do we celebrate it? So let's hear some from other folks. Again, if you want, you can unmute with the little microphone, or you're welcome to type it in the chat box, and I'd be happy to voice it for you.
This is Ed Keelan. I really like the one-page summary that Kimberly showed as her philosophy for IL. It's nice to have it succinct, I think, and understandable and simple. And that came across to me as one that her whole staff could commit to and understand and build training around.
Thanks, Ed. Do you have any thoughts on what you use at your organization?
Well, of course, I'm not an IL person. I'm on the Independent Living Council that kind of is over a lot of the ILs in South Carolina, and we're blessed to be going through a 3-hour training program with, who is it, Kimberly, that's doing the training?
Paula McElroy.
Yeah. So she's on the West Coast, and we're over here in South Carolina, and she's going to do another webinar for us on really to get us up to speed, because I think we have a lot of new people on our council, and we're really struggling to, how do we relate to the ILs and how can we support and continue the journey?
So, hey, Ed, this is Larry. I just want to jump in on that if I could. I spent a couple of years as a Silk director. And, you know, I think it's actually really important for Silks to also look at this. Again, the members of a state independent living council are charged with doing work and making decisions that really can affect the independent living centers. And it's, while you're not directly providing services, I found it's really important to have a really strong onboarding and really ongoing training that helps Silk members to really understand what independent living centers are about, and a lot of those principles that Kimberly talked about. Because again, it's really hard. Sure, you can get a few people from the centers to be on the council, but folks need to come from other places, and it can be really hard to find people who have a good understanding of what independent living centers are about. So they have a general idea, but again, I think it's really important for Silks to have a strong role in this too.
Hey all, this is Kings. I do also want to say, I want to reflect back to the point where, you know, people keep a coffee mug or something of theirs at a sill. I've worked with a lot of the youth programming for Centers for Independent Living. I was the youth fellow for Nickel a few years back. And I have been seeing a wonderfully powerful push to engage youth in kind of carrying on the traditions and the communities and the values that we mentioned before in the IL movement. So I definitely want to, you know, ask, what do you think are some things that we should specifically focus on to make sure we're passing on to the younger generation of IL?
Great question. Kimberly or Larry, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is Kimberly. I'll tell you a little bit about just our youth programming, and we our youth programming is the majority of, I mean, over half of our budget is really dedicated to youth programming. So we have a number of different incentives to really train the future generation of disability leaders. So we do YLF, we have a peer-to-peer group, and we do pre-employment transition services, so a number of things. But we really make sure that our organization is open to them all the time. I mean, from working hours, but making sure that they know that we are a safe place. And so that talk and conversation really starts in the beginning when somebody first gives us a call. You know, the independent living philosophy is taught to all callers in the beginning. And even when a youth may call, or even sometimes parents will call for the youth, we will tell the parent that we actually need to talk with the youth before we can actually implement services, because the youth is our consumer. But we do a number of activities to make sure that not only if you come into our office too, our office is very brightly colored and youth friendly, and we have staff over the youth programs that are young adults. So this is, you know, we definitely live by that model of young adult programs for young adults with disabilities. So young adults leading it for young adults with disabilities. And does that answer some of your questions, Kings, or are you wanting a little bit more information?
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Kimberly.
Awesome. And while we're, other folks are getting to their questions. Sorry, going to meet you, Kimberly. I did have one in the chat from Summit. They're wondering, how do we keep the boundaries clear between aiding somebody in their goal, but not getting into case management? Good question.
That's a really good question. I guess from my perspective, I think it's important to keep those goals in front of you and as the, I don't want to say provider, that's not the right word, but as the IL person who is working with the individual. I think it's, you know, again, it's if you've written those goals well with the consumer driving the process and the staff person kind of prompting a bit, I think they can be good, and it's important to keep those in front of both of you as you work through the process. I also would say that it's really, you know, that's a tough one, because I said this earlier, you can't do for the person. My approach, and I spent, you know, multiple years working as a frontline staff person and still work with consumers today. It's really important to me to do that. And when I get in these situations where I think that the risk is where the individual, the consumer, if you will, is kind of not as engaged or not as active in the process, and you're trying to nudge them forward and encourage them to continue to work toward what it is they came to you for originally. And again, to be reminding them of the goals they set and keeping those in front of them, and to be asking questions about, you know, what they're going to do or what they're doing to address them, and putting tools in their hands, if you will. So, you know, hey, if you go over here to this agency or this state government entity or whatever, this is how you might address the situation. And I'm happy to coach you through a conversation that you might have with that person. You know, it's just an example, but you can't go do that for them. Nothing about us without us is so important when you're working with an individual.
And this is Kimberly. Something that we do within our organization is when we establish goals, we want to make sure that they have a responsibility to achieve their own goal. And when we make sure the philosophy is very clear in the beginning, but we also will provide them with a follow-up, like email, or it could be written and available in alternative formats, but kind of what their responsibilities. And so we come up with their responsibilities list when we're establishing the goals, so that they know that this is their goals, and that they are the ones that will be completing their goals. We will not be completing their goals for them, but we will absolutely be there 100% of the way to that they feel supported, answer questions, making sure that they have resources to navigate that process on their own. And we do a lot of this. I know some SILs do job placements, but we're even very strict about our employment services that we provide, because we don't do job placement, because we've noticed, SILs absolutely, if you do job placements, SILs always do it way better than the VR agencies, because they do use that consumer driven philosophy. But a lot of times what I've seen when job placement is actually done, that the choice is not always there. So it's really who the agency's had a relationship with, and then they will plop somebody into a position, and we don't even go near it with job placement. We will assist them fully with preparing for their job interview, assisting them with developing a resume, applying for positions, asking for reasonable accommodations. If they get that position, we will assist them with writing their accommodation letter. But we try to practice that all the way through our services, but it's explained up front. And we have them sign that they know that we will not be achieving their goals for them.
Wonderful. Any other thoughts on that from the audience, or other questions or thoughts? We'll let folks, again, if you can hopefully press your microphone button. If that's not working, you can type it into the chat. While folks are trying to unmute, I did have another question. Kimberly talked about CEUs for staff. What places besides April, Nickel, and ILRU do you accept for your staff's CEUs?
Yeah, so we have a number of different things. So there's a lot of youth transition conferences in our state that we will send individuals to. There are a lot of home and community-based trainings that are available in our state. Protection and advocacies will do trainings. There has been trainings with, and I know this is not a model that we always like to follow, but person-centered planning is what it is right now until we can push them to do consumer-driven planning. But we've done some, our staff has done some workshops. We have a PR director, a public relations director that has attended different conferences for accessible, accessible documents. So how to create accessible documents and creating meeting spaces. The ADA summits or the ADA symposiums are always a good conference to attend as well. So there's a lot of opportunities within our state. And then we also look at other national conferences as well. I know that organization does a lot around parents with disabilities and protecting their rights. So there's conferences that are offered by a number of different entities that provide that training. And so we budget annually for a professional development and make sure that we have it in our funding to be able to provide that opportunity to all of our staff. And so our staff right now is about, we've got 58 employees at the moment. And so all of them are required, and even our accounting, our CFO who really focuses on financials. She even participates in professional development trainings and required. And then we also, just for professional development, that is part of their evaluation process. So we track their professional development. And then most recently, this was added to our strategic plan recently, we also share what others have learned from conferences. So when somebody goes out to a conference, we make sure that they come back and provide that information for staff, what they really found was interesting. And so we actually have an internal webinar system. So we use Zoom as well, that our staff will actually do. They'll kind of do train the trainer. And so they'll do a webinar based off of the information that they learned from different conferences or different trainings. And so we offer that to our staff too, so that they can also experience some free professional development time, but also experience some of the content that was available at different conferences, because unfortunately we can't send everybody to Nickel and April and all the other conferences that we want to send folks to. So we try to bring that information back as much as possible.
And Kimberly, Sarah's wondering how many staff you have.
So we have 58 at the moment, and we have 11 brand new positions that we just created. So we're rapidly growing.
Great. So one more question from the chat, and please folks feel free to jump in anytime by unmuting your microphone and answering questions or just joining in. But we do have one from Megan, who's wondering, how do folks explain IL philosophy to parents and caregivers who are knowledgeable about the person's needs but insist they can't do something on their own? Another good question.
And this is typical because a lot of times at our organization in particular, speaking on behalf of our organization, we not only hear this from parents, but we hear this from teachers when we're out in the schools doing pre-employment transition services. And so we're really reminding them about our organization, about our philosophy. If they keep saying that they can't, we get a lot of conversations from parents, especially saying, oh, my child will not be able to understand what you're saying. My child's disability is too significant. And we will just reassure them that our organization has, the majority of our staff members actually have significant disabilities, and that we were once children, and we know that feeling of needing the supports that our organization offers. We also use it as a good transition step for the parents, especially when they're calling about their almost adult children. We will remind them that this is a really good skill to allow the young adult to take the lead of their services. And usually we've been extremely successful. We also have a rule that we will not provide services with a family in the room. So we make sure that we up front we'll sit down with the family member and explain our services. If the young adult wants them in the room, or if any of our consumers want somebody in the room, of course that is their choice. But we have that rule up front with all ages. And our information referral staff, we have callers that sometimes are 5 and 6, not them calling directly, but their parents. And our information referral intake folks will actually ask to speak to the 5 and 6 year old too, to make sure that we have their consent. Because even though they're not adults, we want to make sure that they understand our organization just as much as anybody else. So, I mean, we are practicing this very, very early on, because also it's really cool to be able to talk with a young adult or a young child, and being able to say, our organization is run by people with disabilities, and this is the first time often that they've actually seen professionals with disabilities in the environments they've been exposed to. So it's an opener for everybody, but to have that dialogue and really take the time. There are some, of course, helicopter parents that want to know everything that we've said, everything that we've provided, but we really sit down and educate them about you know, our job here is to help your loved one be independent as possible. And sometimes that does mean removing you from the conversations. And they get that.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that I think it's really important to establish this as early in the relationship between you as a staff person, your center, and the youth / parent or guardian. So right up front, I've always encouraged, you know, my staff to, you know, it'll happen where a parent comes in with their son or daughter, or they're on the phone. And we just really are, I've always encouraged people to be very clear about this up front, and not even to engage beyond, okay, some general they're going to give you about why they're calling, but immediately just put it out there that this is about your son or daughter. And so we want to be talking to them, and to just put that into action. So when you're having that conversation, if it's, you know, they've both come into the office, to be directing those questions to the young person and asking for their input. You're going to find a lot of times that this may be the first time, not only that they've experienced seeing people with disabilities as, you know, professionals and employed in general, but it may be the first time that they've been given that opportunity to speak for themselves and to be self-empowered. And it's so important to give them that opportunity.
This is Kim Gibson from Atlanta. I want to piggyback a little bit on what Kimberly and Larry both said at the very beginning. And it really starts with training the staff, because many of our staff themselves have come along or are consumers of services where they've gone through the medical model kind of thing throughout their lives. The one thing that we do for training, like Kimberly said, she did make sure that they have the 18 hours. We do the first with ILRU, with how to process a case and all that kind of stuff. But we also do an hour training, not only for the staff, but for the board members every Friday. And each of the staff members share something about their program, of how to run the program, and how they're and be able to problem solve and ensure that they're looking at the independent living philosophy rather than the handout kind of thing. So the help up and not the handout. And so I think that's really where it starts from, is your staff understanding what IL means, and then passing that along, because a lot of us, or there's quite a few staff members I know that really want to help people rather than, and think by helping people that means doing it for them. So I can't encourage enough of that whole training aspect, like Kimberly and both Larry both stated. And then really taking it to once you talk to one person or parent, that you don't give in kinda, and you just, you know, keep saying the same message over and over and over.
One other thing I want to throw out there real quick before we run out of time, I talked earlier about passing it on to the community, what we're about in IL philosophy. I think it is so important that every staff person at a center is out there in the community, serving on a board or commission or council, or could be government, non-government. And doesn't matter to me if your job is to be that community person, or if you're the information referral person, and maybe even the finance person, that we need to be projecting what we're about and principles of independent living out into government and social and civic activities and happenings and meetings where decisions are made wherever possible. So I really stressed to staff that I've had that I really expect that they're serving on a couple of committees or things of interest, and we review what those are and talk about it. But it's, you know, we're not going to change, we can talk about changing systems, but we're not going to change systems if we don't interface with them. So just a whole nother topic, I suppose, but just really important to be projecting that IL philosophy into the community as much as possible.
And Larry, I'm going to piggyback off of you too. And then if you cannot participate in every local meeting or anything, what I would do and what we do is we encourage, if there's any disability related programs, if there's any programs, where are the people with disabilities? Because we do represent a very large population, and so we also encourage them to seek out people with disabilities every meeting that they have. And so a great example of that is, we have a Transition Alliance of South Carolina, which focuses on youth transition. And for the longest time, they did not have any youth with disabilities on their state. It's kind of like a state board. And so we had to really push for that but to show them the benefits, and they got it, and the board's been great.
Good. And you as a center, when you have your staff doing that, should bring consumer or volunteer with them, right? We need to train other people to be doing this, not just the staff at the center. So provide that training and engage your consumers in other areas of the center, including this opportunity to be advocates out in the community.
Wonderful. And we do have just a couple of more comments in the chat, but really quick, I just wanted to let folks know, again, thank you for hanging in there with our issues getting the captioners in. And as Kimberly mentioned earlier, there is a checklist for staff that she uses for her staff training, and it's on the April website under the Aisle Conversations. And I just wanted to remind folks about that. And then there's just two more little kind of questions that folks are wondering. And if you're in the audience and you'd like to answer, you can unmute from home or for our panelists. And there's two. One is, are there any best practices for SILs with limited staff, maybe those more rural SILs? And how would you speak to a child about IL philosophy to get their consent, or how do you make it relatable to children?
Yeah, and this is Kimberly. And so we do have, we work with students in the schools, but we also have had 5 and 6 year olds, and we really, you have to adapt the way that you communicate with everybody. And so we definitely make sure we do that, but we talk with them about their goals and what they want. And a lot of that age group that has come to our organization has maybe been dealing with bullying. So in a neat way, they're getting peer support from our staff who have sometimes maybe even been through that bullying at that age as well. But also promoting those self-advocacy skills that early. So we teach them how to stand up for themselves. But also, if they need an accommodation, if they need something, if they can't, if they're having a hard time learning in the back of the classroom, what they need to do, if they're needing extra time on their reading assignments or anything like that at school, that we teach them how to go tell somebody when you feel like you're having a hard time or when you're needing something. And that really starts launching that advocacy skill within them at an early age, but also just, again, making them aware that it's okay to have a disability. It's cool. And teaching them that a lot of people just have disabilities in the world, and they're not alone in this. And the impact has been great with a lot of the young kids that have been through our organization, but also the young adults, because this is their safe place, and this becomes their safe place early on.
Thank you, Kimberly. I think that is a really great point. And I know we had some technical difficulties, but here we are at 2:30. I wanted to let folks know, if you still had more comments or questions that you didn't get to ask, please feel free to email me and I will get those to our facilitators. And if you have any resources that you guys use to pass the IL philosophy on to consumers, staff, or the community, please feel free to send them on. We'd love to have them available with this archived call so that folks can, you know, just see what everybody else is doing out there. You know, I believe that with community, you're stronger. And so, you know, the more peer support we can get from one another, the better. And of course, thank you so much for Larry and Kimberly for being here today. And for all of you guys in the audience who participated, definitely makes it a better conversation when we hear more voices. And with that, did you guys have any closing remarks you wanted to make, Larry or Kimberly or anybody in the audience? Oh, well, okay. Did anybody else want to make any closing remarks or anything before we close out? Thank you. Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. And again, thank you for really hanging in there with me. I'll let you know, I actually had my laptop melt in the middle of the presentation, and I've never had that happen before. So I appreciate that everybody was able to keep forging forward. We will talk to you all again. Thanks, everybody.